Okay, so today we're back with another video. First off, thanks for the support on the XY Deoxys video. That was really fun. Today we're going to be doing something that I think is a bit more broad, but also hopefully a bit more digestible, I guess, because I'm probably not going to be ranting for 50 minutes actually. And if you can see this folder here, we're basically going to talk about what I would call the DPP Big Six. Contrary to VGC, where the term Big Six is kind of used to describe the six most used Pokemon on one team, you very well can build a team just around these six Pokemon. Although you probably aren't going to see that super often. Maybe 4 to 5 of them at most. That's not that these Pokemon don't all have synergy together. It's just that there's a lot of viable things you can use in DPP, as we can see here with the viability rankings that we will be referencing in a second. Um, and so this team doesn't tend to be used very commonly as a collective set of six Pokemon. But what I wanted to do is sort of, for those that aren't too familiar with DPP, it is one of the more obscure Doubles OU gens, I guess. Sort of talk about some of the sets of what I would say are the six best Pokemon in the tier. And I feel these are supported by the viability rankings, of course, with all four Tier 1 Pokemon being in this cluster, as well as Gyarados and Mew being ranked in Tier 2. And I think if you asked any active DPP player to name maybe their top 8 Pokemon, they would all six of these would probably show up, if not, definitely top 10. But these are what I would call the top 6. And I think if you are looking to get into the tier, these are 6 Pokemon that you definitely want to be using, definitely want to have some good idea of how to use. And so you can see that I've prepared a box full of sets to talk about. And basically, we're just going to go sort of rapid fire through this and talk about the purpose of these sets and what they do in the metagame as a whole. So we're starting off with Metagross. Metagross, in my opinion, is probably the best Pokemon in the tier, and I say that for one big reason. It's probably the best check, maybe even a counter, arguably, to Latias. Uh, Otherwise, Latias kind of tears through the tier with Draco Meteor, but we'll more on Latias in a second. Metagross, just it's very strong with Meteor Mash. This is the I wouldn't call it buffed or nerfed. They just call it the altered Meteor Mash in Gen 4, as well as Gen 5. But in Gen 4, Meteor Mash has 100 power and 85% accuracy, as opposed to 90 power and 90 accuracy in Generation 6 onwards. So that's something to keep in mind. And we're going to start here with just the simple 3 attacks Metal Coat set. And I should mention that I will, throughout the video, I'm going to be making a couple adjustments to these sets, but I will link this box in the description of the video. Actually, we'll make a copy so that we can tweak the sets throughout and still have the original version. But yeah, this is standard 3 attacks Metagross. It runs Metal Coat because Metal Coat actually gives you a one-hit KO on 252 HP Tyranitar with Meteor Mash, if you're fortunate enough to connect, uh, which is quite nice. Doesn't detract from your bulk like a Life Orb, and just makes you hit really hard. This is typically paired with Earthquake, just because it gives you the best coverage on steals, namely opposing Metagross and Heatran. Also, your best bet to hit water types like Swampert. Um, Sometimes people will run in lieu of Earthquake. You can run Zen Headbutt. Just have double stabs. Gives you a move to throw into Pokemon like flying types in particular, like Zapdos and Gyarados. You can launch a Zen Headbutt into without having to click Explosion. And some people will actually run 4 attacks, which is a set that I am personally quite fond of. And you can do it with Thunder Punch. You can do it with, you can do it with Bullet Punch, which I quite like. Bullet Punch is really nice for picking off things that barely live after, say, a double up from a Meteor Mash and whatever other lead Pokemon you're paired with. So that's nice. Uh, but yeah, I really like the point of running Metal Coat over anything else is that you want to run Meteor Mash and not eat up too much of your bulk. And in the sample EV spread here, I have max speed. Really, you could also be max bulk. Really, the only thing that matters is that you are pumping up that attack amount because, again, you want to get the KO on Tyranitar, which does not always happen without It does not always happen if you are to drop the metal coat. So like we'll pull up here the metagross for DPP showdown usage, and then we'll go to Tyranitar in DPP. We'll do the bulky lead set. We'll do metal coat and adamant. And yeah, you see Meteor Mash with the metal coat exactly picks up the 100% minimum on Tyranitar. So taking any investment out of that takes away from your roll very quickly. 220 even is when you start to see that you miss the guaranteed chance, and already you have to hit Meteor Mash in the first place. So lowering your odds by any is just not super desirable. But that's just one set. This is another set that I put here. This is Jolly Metagross with 4 attacks, and this is something that I like because you can run Thunder Punch, and hit Suicune for a lot. You can hit Gyarados for a lot, blow it up. Obviously, you have the super strong Meteor Mashes just like you do with Metal Coat. And particularly what's relevant here is that we're boosting the power of Explosion. Having boosted Explosion on Metagross is just insane. It I'll just show you. We'll literally we'll do Metagross on Metagross with the Life Orb. Oops. Yeah. I guess we do need to factor in spread damage, but yeah, we're doing almost 75% to the bulkless Metagross. And that's not to say that you would explode on Metagross when you should be having Earthquake, but just in a scenario when you want to explode on something and Metagross is the partner, like you're putting it in range of, say, bulky Zapdos Thunderbolt, stuff like that. Like Life Orb hits truly phenomenal numbers. Earthquake doing really good damage in the Metagross mirror reliably. Even with bulk, you should be reliably 2-hit KOing. Yeah, like that's a really strong chance of 2-hit KO on 252 HP Metagross. And Metagross speeds can kind of vary all the way from 0 speed to 252 Jolly. And it's kind of hard to tell, especially if Metagross is in the lead slot, which it pretty commonly is. So the best advice I can give you is to play cautiously if you're fighting against the lead Metagross until you kind of have a good idea. You can always use the calc and see, okay, is that damage from Metagross? Does it have to be Metal Coat? Does it have to be Adamant? Does it have to be Jolly? You can reverse engineer the damage to figure out some information about the items. There's no obvious review like a Life Orb Recoil. Moving on from Life Orb Metagross, these are kind of the same sets. Life Orb just kind of eats into your bulk a little bit more, which is something to keep in mind. This is a set that, personally, I don't use a lot, but I have seen some people use, so I want to cover it, and it's Choice Scarf Metagross. The biggest niche of this thing is that it gives you a very fast and powerful explosion that is typically not something that you have access to in the tier, because if we look at explosion users and filter by speed, outside of Azelf, you have Gengar and Electrode and nothing else over the 100 speed tier. Azelf is nice, but Metagross even hits above that with Choice Scarf, and and it has more unique offenses, I guess. You have the Meteor Mash still, excuse me, and it's just a different set of offensive coverages than Azelf has with the Steel and Ground. So that's one thing you can do with it. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of this, but it is quite effective. I've seen used in the back, unlike these Metagrosses, which are typically leads. It can come in on something that has 40% health left, and it can launch a stab attack. It can clean 2 weakened foes with Earthquake if you want, or especially you come in, you threaten Explosion when you don't think that the Metagross should be as fast as it is holding a Choice Scarf. And one thing that's nice about this tier is that the way the speed ceiling works, you don't actually need a Jolly Nature to outspeed things with a Choice Scarf. So you can just run Adamant and get a good amount of damage that way. Effectively, your Explosion is as strong as the Metal Coat one that I listed there, so that's interesting to keep in mind. This is Substitute Metagross, and this one typically does run bulk. And it's kind of interesting. It just sort of plays off of the fact that Metagross as a defensive steel type has a lot of staying power, and especially if you can get it behind a substitute, it can be quite hard to remove while still firing off pretty strong Meteor Mashes and Earthquakes. Again, you can also do Zen Headbutt over Earthquake if you're looking to hit Zapdos and Gyarados for a little bit more damage. This is not a set that I would ever suggest running Explosion on, since it kind of defeats the purpose of investing in substitute to then just click explosion, and especially it limits your coverage with meteor mash. And I also would run substitute in 3 attacks. If you're gonna go through the trouble to run protectless Metagross, and I just go all out and run 4 attacks with Life Orb or Metal Coat. But yeah, it has a lot of staying power. It's effectively good at beating Latias, which is, again, like, if that is something that you want your Metagross to do, then you should put this Metagross in the back and have it just stick around, wait for Latias to come into the field, switch it on Draco Meteor, eat it pretty nicely, and get your leftovers recovery. And then the last set that we have here is Agility Metagross. This one, I feel like it's kind of fallen off recently, but I did still want to mention it. It's kind of the same logic as Choice Scarf Metagross, but a bit different in that, like, it takes the turn to set up, but then you get to switch moves, so you can drop a Meteor Mash on somebody. You can just click Explosion if you want. You can click a really fast Explosion if you manage to set up Agility. Just a lot of different options, and it's nice. Like, if I personally am seeing a Metagross in the lead, I'm expecting one of these two sets, right? Like, I'm expecting either like 3 attacks, bulky, Metal Coat, potentially bulky, potentially not. Or I'm expecting like a really fast Life Orb set with like 4 attacks, where it's either these or like Zen Headbutt or Bullet Punch. If I'm seeing Metagross in the back, I'm mostly going to play off of assuming it's like a bulky substitute set, and so that's sort of the power of these sets, is that they can catch you off guard a little bit with, turbo explosions that maybe you aren't 100% prepared for. And moving on from Metagross, we have Latias. So I'm going to come down here and talk about the bread and butter Latias set. This is just Choice Specs Draco Meteor. It clicks Choice Specs Draco Meteor. So initially, when DPP Doubles OU was first formed, we had a Latios in the tier. And Latios is actually the only Pokemon that has been banned after sort of the initial setup wave of the tier. We banned it in a suspect test just because Specs Draco Meteor from Latios hit way too hard for the tier. But here we have Latias, hits about 5 to 10% less on average, depending on what you're throwing your attacks into. And that's quite big in the concept of Draco Meteor. And typically, we run it with these coverage moves: Thunderbolt, Grass Knot, Hidden Power, Ground. Thunderbolt, good for hitting Gyarados in particular. Also does some solid damage to Suicune, a bit more efficiently than Draco Meteor does. Grass Knot, mostly for Swampert and Tyranitar. And then Hidden Power, Ground for the Steels, Metagross, and Heatran. Hidden Power Fire is something you can run for Metagross and Scizor, but I wouldn't particularly recommend it, just because Hidden Power Fire actually drops your speed. It drops your speed IV by 1. It forces you to run a 30 speed IV. And so if you're ever in a situation where you need to risk a Latias speed tie to win the game, you want to actually be in the position to be in that speed tie, not just automatically forfeit because you chose to run Hidden Power Fire. And ultimately, I just would not recommend it. You can pair Latias with Pokemon to deal with Scizor, and again, Hidden Power Ground hits Metagross for the same effectiveness. This is the most threatening offensive Pokemon in DPP Doubles OU, in my opinion, because it is able to just, without any setup, come into the field, click Draco Meteor on whatever it wants, and it's either forcing a switch, which is a passive play from the opponent, accomplishes 0 damage from the slot that is switching, or it's taking a kill on whatever's on the field. Honestly, there are very few Pokemon that, unresisted, are going to enjoy taking the Specs Draco Meteor. And all the coverage as well means that a lot of other Pokemon are just in KO range, even if they would take a Draco Meteor. Things like the aforementioned Swampert and Gyarados probably can be easy to take Specs Draco Meteor. Well, Swampert definitely does naturally, and Gyarados probably does not take that much investment. However, Thunderbolt and Grass Knot are going to be cleanly picking up Okos on those Pokemon, so just something to keep in mind. And also something to keep in mind in the builder, you definitely want a Steel type on your team. I would say that a Steel type is practically mandatory on every team. You'd have decent options in the tier between Metagross and things like Heatran. Bronzong is a very common one that I didn't mention, and Scizor. Registeel used to see some play, but with the banning of Thunderwave in the tier, it's not something that I could wholeheartedly recommend. Empoleon is decent, but I would probably stay away from it, especially if you're newer to the tier. And I would stick with one of the tier 1 through 3 steals to check Latias. But in addition to Choice Specs, can also run Choice Scarf pretty commonly. And I like Choice Scarf a lot because with Choice Scarf, you can come in and you can actually OHKO Choice Specs Latios, excuse me. So that's nice. Something that you can kind of determine when building your team is: would you rather have a leg up in the Latios arms race, or would you rather do more damage with Draco Meteor? And sometimes the answer is not always clear. Like, you might think that you should always be going for more damage, but that's not necessarily always true. And sometimes it's not even about just the Scarf on Latios, but having a Scarf Pokemon at base 110 speed means you're outspeeding to other Scarf users, things like Zapdos, Flygon, Infernape. What else do we have that commonly runs Scarf? It's probably about it. Maybe Salamence. But again, Latios is moving above all of those. And one thing that I particularly like about it is Scarf Trick is just really disruptive for a lot of the setup options in the tier. Obviously, we've already talked about something like Substitute Metagross, where if you're able to trick into Choice Scarf on the Substitute turn, that would be particularly devastating. But there are other things as well. Calm Mind Suicune, probably one of the more threatening setup Pokemon in the tier, definitely gets crippled by getting tricked to Choice Scarf. Several others. Bronzong absolutely does not want to be tricked to Choice Scarf. Like, there's a lot of Pokemon where if you're just in a position where it's like, okay, either like my Latios is chilling and I definitely have a turn to trick this Choice Scarf that I won't need for this game, or it's okay, my Latios is in a position where probably the most it can accomplish is disrupting something, so I want to click Trick. Like, either of those are great positions to click the move and get a little bit of value out of the Pokemon. And sometimes you can steal valuable items from other Pokemon, citrus berries, leftovers, life orbs, etc. All pretty nice to have. I do like to run Modest on my Latios, just because I feel like the damage is definitely appreciated, and I would rather not, like, this is kind of antithetical to what I was just talking about with Hidden Power Fire, but I feel like if I was in a Choice Scarf Latios mirror, I would kind of just hold the fact that I didn't run Timid, because that means that I can get more value out of being Modest on literally every other interaction that isn't Choice Scarf Latios versus Choice Scarf Latios. And again, so many of these are Modest already that, like, you're probably more likely to opt into a tie by staying Modest than you are to lose a tie by going Modest. And the value that you get on everything else, I cannot state enough. That is quite big. So after the choice sets, and one thing I kind of forgot to include in here, but you definitely can run, is just Life Orb Latios. Kind of the same logic. You know, Draco Meteor, and then you can pick 2 of your 3 favorite coverage moves and run Protect. With the ability to switch moves and at a bit of a damage detriment. But the other 2 sets I have in here are a bit more experimental, I guess you'd say. This one isn't so experimental in the sense that, like, nobody has ever used this before, but just it's a bit more out there compared to the other 2 sets, and it's Calm Mind Latios. This set is kind of appealing for people that think that Latios can, like, absolutely 1v1, 1v6 the tier or whatever, which is definitely not true. But if you're smart with setup, you use things like Togekiss, use fake outs to get it going. Like, it can serve as a strong late game win condition or, you know, an early game breaker. And it could definitely force explosion on some Pokemon that have it, if that's something that you'd like to do. Again, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of this set because I feel like it's a lot of investment for what is ultimately a bit too little payoff. Like, Calm Mind Dragon Pulse is just too slow, in my opinion, to really dominate the games in the way that, like, you'd want it to. Especially with the respect that you need to give it in the builder, where, like, maybe you aren't building an entire team around this Pokemon, but, like, you should be dedicating a couple slots to enabling the setup. However, it is something that does get used, and probably something that you yourself should be giving some respect to in the team builder. Make sure you aren't getting 6-0'd by Calm Mind Latios. Sometimes they'll run Substitute over Protect. You know, mostly to block things like Toxic and subsequent explosions, which you can't really do with Protect unless you want to gamble on, you know, getting your double Protect at 50%. It is important to remember that double Protects are 50% in Doubles Gens 3 through 5, which is quite relevant, especially in 3 and 4. Well, actually, just in 4 now, where we have the super broken explosion. Yeah. And then the last set, this is something that I've liked using a bit recently, personally, and that is Habanberry Latios. I think that Habanberry is pretty sick. This actually lets you take Choice Specs Draco Meteor from opposing Latios 100% of the time and KO back 100% of the time with these EVs, which is quite sick. coverage move doesn't really matter a ton because kind of the main thing is that you just want to guarantee that you're winning 1v1s versus the dragons all the time, which means that you want to click Draco Meteor. You do need Draco Meteor, unfortunately. It would be really sweet if you could just run Dragon Pulse and, not have to worry about connecting Draco Meteor, but unfortunately that is the risk that you have to take without running a boosting item. But outside of checking Latias, this is also pretty nice for checking things like Choice Scarf's Elements and definitely Kingdra on rain teams. This set can definitely disrupt rain teams pretty heavily, and you could even go an extra step further and choose to run Sunny Day. I'm pretty sure Latias gets Sunny Day, so if you want to go the extra mile and disrupt rain that way, you can. And I kind of put Toxic and Healing Wisp on as just kind of like moves that I think are neat. You can really do whatever you want with these slots as well. You could run 4 attacks if you want. You could run Draco Meteor, Roost, Protect. It's kind of all up to you. The Draco Meteor and the Haban Berry is the important thing here. But yeah, definitely worth keeping in mind that like Latias is a really good addition on any team. It should probably be kept in the back on basically anything because sort of the idea is that anything that has any sort of chip damage is deathly afraid of Latias coming in because unless it's like Azelf, or Raikou, there's a very likely chance that Latias is going to be outspeeding it and KOing it. And so it is like it cannot be understated how effective Latias is at cleaning things up and revenge killing. And I think that grants it the title of at least like top 3. I have it here as second best. These are sort of in order of my personal opinion of viability, but definitely some people would argue that it is the best mon in the tier, I think. And moving on to now Mew. Mew is pretty interesting. It's had sort of probably the most up and down sort of viability in the tier, I'd guess, where initially people weren't too into Mew, and then Mew usage kind of spiked for a long time, and then people sort of adjusted to how much Mew was in the tier. And now I think we're in a period where Mew is once again pretty good. And I would say it's probably top 3, maybe 4th at worst. And so we're going to start with like the pretty standard utility set here. This is just Fake Out Stealth Rock Mew. Very solid early game Pokemon. It does exactly what is advertised. You click Fake Out, you can click Stealth Rock, and then you have 2 decently strong offensive options that cover each other. If you want, you can do max special attack investment on this instead of just 4 special attack investment. And that will do stuff like 2-shot bulkless Metagross. Maybe it's even 2-shot bulky Metagross. Let's find out. Mew. Doubles OU lead. Yeah, so you can see, like, if you match the special attack to HP investment, like, you're getting a pretty good shot to 2 a KO. So that's worth considering. And Mew is definitely bulky enough that it can survive off of 4 HP. But yeah, it's just kind of a standard, you can click Fake Out to enable your partner. You can click Stealth Rock. And Stealth Rock isn't like... It's a bit less common than it used to be in DPP, but I still think it's pretty good. Helps with putting things into like Latias and explosion range on offensive teams. Like it is, and there's enough flying Pokemon in the tier that like sometimes you'll get the extra damage bump. So I think it's valuable. But moving on to personally my favorite Mew set in the tier, this is Swords Dance Mew. It's definitely like not intuitive. You probably would not think about running Swords Dance Mew under normal circumstances, but it's really, really good. Just being one of the only Pokemon in the tier that can like quickly boost up and then click Explosion is really nice. +2 Sucker Punch with Life Orb, I believe KOs Latias. Let's double check that here. And yeah, there are some Mew sets actually in the calc. Not every DPP set is in the calc, but we have a fair amount of these, and maybe more will be added eventually if there's the interest for that. But yeah, we see here at +2 attack, Sucker Punch guaranteed KO on Latias, which is really, really nice. Earthquake, just to complement, hits things like Metagross that wouldn't otherwise like take a lot from Sucker Punch or Explosion. One thing you gotta watch out for with this set is Rotom H. Various Rotom sets, if they are not clicking an attacking move, then they kind of wall you, being immune to both Explosion and Earthquake. But it's not the biggest deal. You can pair with Tyranitar, stuff like that. And nowadays, like, I feel like offensive Rotoms are, like, the more common ones, like Choice Specs and such. So there's a good chance you can just whack a Sucker Punch into it anyways. But this set is really strong. I like it particularly from the lead. Just being able to like set up and click Sword Stance and then Explosion. It's really powerful. Something fun you can do is lead it with something that doesn't often run Protect. Uh, Back in the day, I used to actually lead this with. I think it was. It might have been Rotom in the lead actually. I'm gonna go over to my DPP team folder here and see if I can find it. Uh, doesn't seem like I have it. But anyway, what I wanted to emphasize is just that leading um, the Swords Dance Mew next to a Pokemon that doesn't protect, like, kind of baits your opponent into thinking that you probably aren't going to be clicking Explosion turn one, and then you can, like, switch into Rotom and click Explosion, which is really, really funny. Or you can just sweep a Swords Dance if you have the opportunity to set up and get going. Definitely effective from the back as well, but I kind of like the idea that this should be used as like a battering ram and not a sweeper that will carry you through the entire game. Click Swords Dance, get anywhere from 1 to 3 kills, maybe. Three would be really good. And at that point, like, you're probably winning the game. And it's my favorite Mew set, just straight up. Like, definitely not one that you'd think of just like looking at Mew in a vacuum in this tier, but it is so good. And moving on, this is the 4 attack special Mew that got used a little bit in Doubles Derby last year. Kind of similar to the Swords Dance Mew in that, like, it just wants to battering ram things with its wide array of coverage. You see here I have Ice Beam, but like you can also run Thunderbolt. You can run U-Turn to pivot out. Does it get Nasty Plot in this gen? Yeah, it gets Nasty Plot. You run Nasty Plot. You can still do Explosion, honestly, which is really funny, but you can. Earth Power, the options are endless here. I would really run Grass Knot and Flamethrower, like, pretty much always. I think they give you solid coverage. And Psychic just to have a strong stab. But it's really whatever you want to do. I do recommend Expert Belt instead of Life Orb. Most of the time, with 4 special attacks, like, you're going to be able to find a super effective target, but also, like, Mew is a Pokemon that I wouldn't really recommend cutting into its bulk, especially when you aren't going to be using it as, like, an explosion sacrifice piece. It's just a really strong set. And it can kind of be a Swiss Army knife, you know? The set isn't very rigid. It's just pick 4 special attacks that you think your team would benefit from and run them. And then lastly, I have bulky, like, Trick Room Pivot Mew, I guess is how I describe this one. I would mostly use this with Trick Room cores that utilize things like Rhyperior. Like, this would be like a really good lead next to like Bronzong, maybe. Click Fake Out Trick Room, and then you can either Explosion, or you can U-turn out and have Mew come back later in the game and set a late game Trick Room because Mew is so hard to remove in one shot. And you can even, if you'd like, you can take these EVs out of offense and invest in bulk to make the late game Trick Room even more reliable. I know for the longest time, something like this was used on a sample team. I don't know if we still have it as a sample. Yeah, it seems like it was an archive sample, but the Cloister team, if I can find it, yeah, used something pretty similar to this. It was It was Explosion Mew, but it was fast Explosion Mew. But I also like the bulky U-turn pivot Mew. It's just really strong. You can do a lot of things from it from the lead, and it's not a set that's always like the easiest one to intuitively determine, and that is something that gives you a lot of value in DPP, because a lot of the game without team preview comes down to like assessing leads and picking the least risky option to click on turn one, and sometimes you get rewarded for running a set that people don't always keep in consideration. So moving on to Tyranitar. Tyranitar, what it does really well in this tier is it just checks a lot. Like, it beats a lot 1v1. Latias gets bodied by a strong crunch, or you can come in after Draco Meteor and Pursuit Trap it, which is really funny. Zapdos does almost nothing to Tyranitar, and then Tyranitar can fight back with Rock Slide or Stone Edge. There's other Psychic types that get used that Tyranitar just sits on. If we look at the VR, there's Cresselia, there's Azelf, there's Gengar. It disrupts rain. It can, it can superpower Kangaskhan. It beats Raikou one-on-one pretty commonly. It superpowers Clefable for 1 billion damage. It just has the tools to. Oh, Rotoms. Rotoms as well. Just walls Rotoms, absolutely. And so it can be very useful if you want to say use Choice Band Tyranitar to Pursuit Trap things like Latias and Rotom and remove those for maybe your slow psychic type like an offensive Mew in the back. It's just really strong. Choice Band is definitely my favorite set, but as you see here, we also have some other sets. So first, we'll talk about Dragon Dance. This is a pretty potent late game cleaner. Uh, Crunch and Stone Edge isn't always the offensive combination that I see used, and Passion Berry definitely isn't the item that I always see used. You can run a boosting item, you can run Life Orb, you can run Leftovers. There's like a little bit of use for Lumberry nowadays, in that like if you get Will Wisp, you can shrug it off. But thanks to the Thunderwave ban, you don't really need to run Lumberry. I would feel like, um, you can run Berry to take like a Metagross Meteor Mash pretty well, or a Scizor Bullet Punch, especially a boosted Scizor Bullet Punch. You have a lot of options, but it's pretty standard. You click Dragon Dance when you have a board of two things that don't really do a lot of damage to Tyranitar, and then you just kind of attempt to run over the game. Very powerful set. And rounding out our Tyranitar sets here, we have Scarf Tyranitar. It's kind of the same uh, effect. Like it's the same idea as Choice Band Tyranitar in that it's a Tyranitar and its coverage moves that are very strong, but now they're also slightly less strong and very fast. This is cool. It outspeeds Spexiladios. It outspeeds Rotoms. Outspeeds Mew. And I don't think you outspeed Azelf with Jolly +1 Tyranitar. No, you do. You do outspeed Azelf. So that's another thing you can KO. So yeah, with the Jolly Nature and Scarf, you outspeed pretty much the entire tier. Could come in and drop strong damage on them. And lastly, we have the what I would call the utility Tyranitar. Again, this is something you can run a variety of items on. Resist berries are common. Chople Berry for Hitmontop, a Berry Berry for the Steel attackers. I like Citrus Berry just because it helps you like eat hits from like a Latias pretty reliably. I like Crunch and Stone Edge for the offense here. With the attack, you can hit Latias, you can hit Zapdos. You could Stealth Rock. You could run like Protect or a third attack in this slot, but I particularly like Roar. It's very nice for disrupting setup sweepers. Something like Suicune probably will take the opportunity to Calm Mind on a Tyranitar if it isn't like in a particularly vulnerable spot opposing the partner, and that's where Roar comes in. It's pretty solid. Also can be used on Trick Room setters in a pinch if you're in the position to, survive the turn and still roll them out. It's pretty nice. Moving on from Tyranitar, we have Zapdos. Zapdos is kind of I would say in a slightly awkward spot post the Thunderwave ban, because it was probably the most prominent user of Thunderwave in the tier. Is trying to find its footing now. This is what I would say is my personal favorite set, the bulky like support pivot Zapdos. It's sort of how I would equate it to Pokemon like Rillaboom and Incineroar in more modern generations, where it just sponges up a lot of damage and it can U-turn out. It can drop a strong Thunderbolt if you want, and it can shrug off a lot of the damage you do to it with the Roost. Toxic is what I have in the filler slot here, but you could easily run like Hidden Power Grass or Ice or Signal Beam to do slightly more damage to Latias, Heat Wave to like Metagross and Scizor. It's just super hard to remove, and while it isn't going to like 1v1 a lot of things, it's definitely going to annoy the majority of the tier, and it's still fast enough and offensive enough that you can come in on weakened Pokemon and take them out with Thunderbolt. But if you want some more offensive Zapdos sets, this is, just your standard 3 attacks Life Orb, max speed. You can run Hidden Power Grass instead of Hidden Power Ice if you want to hit Swampert, as opposed to, Hidden Power Icing like Salamence and Latias. And again, if you're specifically looking for Latias, I would run the Signal Beam over Hidden Power Ice. Gives you 5% stronger damage. But yeah, Heat Wave is pretty useful. There's not a lot of prominent fire Pokemon in the tier. It's basically Infernape and Heatran, and then like Overheat, Rotom Heat. So Heat Wave can be pretty useful fire coverage on Zapdos if that's something that you're looking for. But yeah, these Life Orb Thunderbolts really just do 1 billion. Like they're 2-shotting Metagross easily, 2-shotting the offensive Mews. It's very strong. And if you're looking for something that's a bit more fast as opposed to a bit more strong, here's Scarf Zapdos. This is a set that I don't want to take credit for, but I feel like I was the first person that I saw use the set. It's really good, in my opinion. Um, Outspeeds every Scarfer bar, like, and I have Timid on this to outspeed Modest Latias in particular. So you can outspeed, if you want to run Timid like me, you can outspeed every Scarfer except for Timid Latias. You can run Modest and basically outspeed everything else. I guess one other thing that you do miss is like not speed boosting nature in Fernape. Infernape isn't like super common, and definitely they aren't all Choice Scarf, but something to keep in mind, I guess, if you would find yourself like being particularly weak to Infernape and you want to run Choice Scarf Zapdos. And again, Zapdos is something that I feel like hits hard enough and does the job well enough that maybe running Timid just works out anyway. But it's really nice. You have like the offensive coverage of the offensive set, and then you also have the pivot ability of the pivot set, and you kind of just shove them in one set and say I'm going to do this very fast and moderately hard. And Zapdos just has a really good defensive profile over the tier. We've already talked about how Metagross is like commonly has to click Explosion into it or run Zen Headbutt, which is not a thing that it always does. And outside of like Galadios and Tyranitar, there's just not a lot that threatens it outright. We can see here Gyarados is another Pokemon that definitely does not want to be matched up against Zapdos. Coming further into the VR, we see Swampert definitely doesn't like HP Grass Zapdos. Uh, Heatran typically gets beaten by it one-on-one. Uh, Scizor definitely does not enjoy facing it. Bronzong has to explode on it, and depending on your bulk, Explosion is not even going to always pick up the KO. And, even into the lower tiers, Suicune definitely doesn't like it. Heracross, unless it's locking into Stone Edge and hitting multiple Stone Edges, it's not beating Zapdos. So, yeah, just a very solid offensive Pokemon with a commanding presence all around. And I would say, we've kind of gone back and forth in the tier about what's the best electric between Zapdos and Raikou and Rotom. But I would agree with the VR nowadays that Zapdos is just the best electric, and that is very important. I wouldn't say that electrics are mandatory in your team, but it is quite nice to have at least one electric, and you can definitely run multiple if that is something that you would like to do. But we're going to close it out here with 3 Gyarados sets. Most importantly, or I guess first and foremost, I should say, we have the tried and true Dragon Dance set. And I guess first of all, I should talk about Gyarados. It's a very powerful, like, offensive utility Pokemon, but the utility isn't in something like clicking U-turn or Fake Out or Stealth Rock. It's the fact that it runs Intimidate. You can cut off opposing Gyarados, you can cut off Infernape, you can cut off Scizor, Hitmontop, Tyranitar, Rhyperior. The defensive profile grants it coverage against Heatran and Fernape. They aren't running Thunder Punch, I guess I should say. Metagross, another one that, like, if they aren't running Thunder Punch, you're forcing them to click Explosion, and that's a pretty worthwhile 1v1 trade for you. I would say that the Dragon Dance set is, like, definitely the most threatening because it's pretty easy to send out Gyarados in the mid to late game onto Pokemon that just don't threaten it with anything, like, that strong. Click Dragon Dance and sort of take over the game. You can run a couple alternative attacks to Stone Edge. You can run Ice Fang to hit Latias for a bit more damage. You can run Earthquake. I personally like Waterfall and Stone Edge the most. Not only does Stone Edge give you the edge on Zapdos, but it's also something you can throw off in the mirror. And it's just generally like pretty solid coverage on the tier's Water Resist. It's Kingdra Ludicolo for decent damage, especially at boosted numbers. And if you don't feel like you have the time to click Dragon Dance, depending on your team's tempo, you can always just run Choice Band, which kind of does effectively the same thing. Hits very hard with Waterfall and its sort of coverage items. Just doesn't have the speed to take over the game, so it is pretty much dead on arrival if it ever ends up facing down one of the electrics. And all the electric outspeed it naturally, which is a little awkward for it. That's why I typically prefer Dragon Dance. But if you're going to pair it with something like a Lightning Rod or Hyperior, then this is definitely a bit of a viable option. And then the last set, this is like a bulky utility Gyarados. This definitely used to see more usage when Thunder Wave was legal, because again, it was a very prominent Thunder Wave user. Nowadays, not so much, but I still think you can get decent mileage out of this set on a Scrubber team. Toxic, really good, especially for hitting things like Setup Mew, Setup Suicune, and Taunt and Roar, just pretty solid disruption moves all around. You can run a lot more bulky Vs and just sort of make use of Gyarados' profile as a bulky water more than like an offensive water that probably wants to come in like once, maybe switch out, and then maybe come back in and click Dragon Dance or Choice Band Waterfall. But this one is definitely a bit more of an advanced set, I'd say. If you're just looking to throw Gyarados on a team, I'd start with the Dragon Dance set and sort of work your way around from there. I would, because this is the set that I would say is like the least reliant on like Rhyperior support, and Rhyperior can be a Pokemon that's a bit difficult to build into teams as well. Maybe that'll be something that I'll talk about in a subsequent video. But I think for this, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. That's basically all I wanted to talk about. I will link the DPP thread and the PokePaste for these sets in the description. Thanks for watching.